Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello. Do you hear me, Lauren?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. And see you too.
Yes.
Okay, people are joining. Okay.
One more of these, I have to spend, do a little bit of investment on the microphone.
Ah, you need one of these, man.
I know, I know. I'm hearing you and I am appreciating it.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Whenever you talk to somebody who is a video producer, they will always tell you that half of video is audio. So you
So true.
always want to make sure you have good audio. So let's
Yep,
see here.
indeed. Oh, one person, Cheetah, is raising hand.
Yeah, I see that. Yes. Let's talk to the host and the panelists. Jada, you can make me the host if you like, and then rejoin. I don't think we're live yet, from what I can see.
We're not.
I don't think so. Because from my understanding, Jita opened it up. She's gonna make us the host. And then she dropped out. Hello, Jita.
I'm your host already. I made you host.
Yeah, okay. Are you in? Do you need to rejoin or what?
No, can you just please add me as a panelist?
Gotcha. Okay, you're a panelist. And you see that? Okay.
Okay, I think we're good to go. If you can just give me host again, and then we're ready to start.
Okay, 1 second. Shh. Okay, I'm gonna make you a co-host, okay?
No worries, of course.
Okay, there you go. Just let us know when we're ready to go.
I think we can start. It's already 8:01.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, are we live?
We are live. Let's
We
start.
are live. Okay, everybody, we're live. Welcome. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Hurst, and I am here with Adil Faisal. He is the co-lead, as I am, of the Government and Services Innovation Community. Welcome today to our kickoff event. The way that we're going to do this today is, first of all, this is going to be very much discussion driven. Okay. Adil and I will talk about some of the different topics and approaches that we want to take with the community. We're going to go through three main themes that we want to focus on. And then after we talk about that a little bit, we'll open it up for questions. Then at the end of the session, we'll just kind of throw it open to everybody and whatever topics that you want to talk about. So, Adil, let me introduce you. Tell me a little bit about your background and why you are here today.
Well, thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Jida, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I've been with Jeannie from the periphery for some time. So I am Adil Faisal, and I operate an impact venture studio called 8126 Ventures. I live in Maryland, and I've been with the product innovation space for about 2 decades. I'm old. And so first 10 years, I was in startups. My software background is software related product innovation. And first 10 years was with startups, spent some time in Microsoft as when they gobbled up our startup, gave me a vantage view of how big fishes eat small fish. And then 10 plus years, I did federal consulting in the DC metro area. Worked with NIH, USCIS, a bunch of HHS, bunch of agencies here. Also working on product innovation in the public service space. And then last 6 years or so, I've been doing the venture studio. And so right now we are deeply looking into future of work, wealth and well-being, and specifically how public agencies can spearhead innovation in these categories. So extremely happy to be here and love to learn from all of you and see where this goes.
Okay, great. A little bit about myself. I am originally from California, and I have been living in between the East Coast of the US and Europe for about 20 years now. I spent time in France, Romania, and Belgium, where I was active in the clean energy space and working with lots of local associations. I've been involved with incubators and accelerators for a long time. I do have an interesting background in that I do have a lot of experience in the venture capital and the enterprise development space. And on the flip side of that, I've done a lot of work with government agencies, specifically in the foreign affairs context. And so that's a little bit about my background in terms of how I approach this. My main skill set is communications. And so when I look at innovation, it's something that, for me, it's all rooted in communications. For example, when you talk to a lot of venture capitalists, and Adil, you could probably confirm this for me, they don't invest in a great business plan or a great business model. All those things are important, but they really invest in people. They're taking a look at the management team and making sure that they have a key understanding of their markets. How committed are they to their particular business model? Okay, are they going to ride out the tough times, when they inevitably come? So when I approach this, I'm going to talk a lot about how do you build relationships, within a government innovation context. So why don't we go ahead and start with our first theme? And Adil, you and I have talked a lot about this. We've had a few conversations, gone back and forth. The first thing that we want to focus on in the community is that innovation in government spaces is by nature interdisciplinary. So, what does that mean, interdisciplinary? Whenever you are dealing with government spaces, you're talking about organizations that have a constituency, citizens. They don't necessarily have a profit motive or a business model, but they are responsible to those people that they're serving. And a lot of times you have a lot of different interests that come into these debates. And so you need to find a way to communicate and make sure everybody's kind of reading from the same sheet. So that's my initial take on that is, how do you do that? We'll talk a little bit more about that. So Adil, what are your thoughts on that? What does interdisciplinary mean, from your mindset?
So I think it all stems from how interdisciplinary the problems that are getting solved by public agencies are, right? It's the health service may be dependent on some, within the health service, there are so many sub-agencies, and typically very seldom is one person's or citizens problem is solved by a single entity or a single so in order to innovate around in public space, I think that's a blue ocean of innovation right there. How to get the frictions down among agencies, whether it's within a single city, county, state, country, and nowadays in this interconnected world, how do you interface among countries, right? And and I'd love to hear from our community what they're doing and what's the state of the art and what's the North Star for us.
Right, that's right. And another thing I think is important to know is that when you're dealing with innovation, particularly within a government context, I mean, government by its nature is very risk averse, right? I mean, they're not there to take huge risks on unknown technologies or processes or whatever that is. And that's not their job. You know, they're there to again spend taxpayer money and make sure that they're getting the services that they need. They want to improve that over time, of course. But again, how do you do that within a government context? Now, in my experience, having done innovation and run projects within, government agencies, a lot of times, the most important skills that you have are what we call soft skills. Again, relationship building. You need to gain confidence and trust, with the people that you're working with. And a lot of times it comes down to very simple things. And one thing that I love to do as part of communications and, bringing teams together and building those relationships is to tell stories. Okay, so here's one story for you. I'm in a government agency and I am putting together a new multimedia program. Okay, that it was an emerging technology at the time. It was podcasting. Now, of course, it's a big deal. Everybody's doing a podcast. And in fact, that's one of the things we'll be doing within our community. At the time, I was in a meeting with a lot of office directors, and they didn't understand what it was. And it was a case where the project may have actually been in danger because people didn't get it. And so we were explaining podcasting, all the different technical aspects of it, and I was getting this strange look. And I said, "Okay, look, listen, it's radio for the internet." Okay. And that's basically all it is. And they said, "Oh, okay, I got that now." And so, even with a very simple anecdote or a very simple analogy, you can build trust and confidence among your stakeholders. And that is one of the key things when you're dealing with different disciplines who aren't speaking the same language. As an innovator and as a person who manages those communities, you have to bring those people together. And that's one of the ways that you can do that. Um, any other thoughts, Adil?
You just triggered a very interesting point there. Yes, yes. Just triggered a very interesting point when you said speaking the same language. That nomenclature, I think, matters. Not I think, I mean, it matters to an extent that many of the misunderstanding or inefficiencies I've seen around disciplinary boundaries is because for the same term, different people will mean different things, and that
That's right.
causes so much drama, right, or inefficiency around it. So, and specifically, when you're higher up, the more higher up, the chance of misunderstanding affecting everybody down below is kind of amplified. So there's nothing higher up than governments. So if there is misunderstanding at that level, we have a problem. So absolutely, trust boundaries, you touched on that. And one interesting thing I am drawing from my software engineering background is that in software we actually we have come up with they have come up with zero trust systems, right? How can you operate with each other even when don't wait for 5 years, 10 years to establish trust, but how can we still operate on common ground, on common vocabulary and common goals, right?
That's right. And it's one of those things that a lot of people just don't think about, but it's so, so important. You have, and I'm sure everybody can identify with this, you have meetings, you have great ideas, and then when it actually comes down to doing the work, it's kind of stalls. It doesn't seem to go anywhere. And again, this is very pronounced when you have big, complex government agencies that you're trying to do that to that end. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in terms of how do you put a process and an operation behind that. So let's go ahead and see if we have any questions. That's the first theme. Okay, so government spaces are interdisciplinary. Anybody have any questions that they want to throw out or comments at this point?
Or stories.
Or stories. Good stories are always great. Everybody loves a good story. Okay, doesn't look like we have any yet. Okay. Well, think about those things and we'll come back to you later in terms of the question. So Adil, the next thing that we talked about was the idea of ecosystems, okay? Innovation ecosystems. This, again, I think is very, very important, and particularly within a government context, again, because it is so risk averse. and they do have responsibilities and commitments to the constituencies. They have budgets that they need to report on and that sort of thing. It's difficult to conduct innovation within those spaces, because of those regulatory constraints and really because of the culture. Okay. Now, in my experience, what I've seen that is very valuable is that within the organization that you're in, if it's foreign affairs or if it's healthcare or agriculture or whatever it is, within that government organization, you want to set aside a space, what we would call a sandbox, the concept where you just go into a certain space and you play, you innovate, go ahead and make mistakes. You set aside that time to, purposefully do those things. Now, again, this is the best place, I would think, to build relationships between those disciplines, to bridge those silos, which is always a huge thing that we're dealing with all the time in innovation. That is something that when you do set aside these ecosystems, you can bring people in who are maybe unsure about innovation. They don't know really what it means. And there you can have these open conversations to make sure that everybody is speaking the same language and on the same page. What are your thoughts on that?
So, this is actually a topic very close to my heart. There are some really good books called Loon Shots, and then I'm sure you've heard about Innovator's Dilemma, which dives right into this, that what does it mean to create an ecosystem within a government or in any organization, right? And it has been proven again and again that when an organization or a government has a day job to run, you have to carve out a space away from that structure to pursue or like disruptive innovation, right? And this is something, the sandbox structure, I think it's you can call it venture studio. You can it may take its own form because it's public agency, but it has to be a structure away from ecosystem, away from the daily grind of the business, right? That's one thing. And yes, we are risk averse as governments, but I think one point I'd like to make is there's probably an opportunity for innovation around the way we innovate in public space, right? We don't have to follow the enterprise venture capital angel funders mindset, because these are two different mindsets, a public servant's mindset versus that. I think there's some interesting topics to explore in that category.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's something that, again, in my experience, it really comes back to basic things, communication, relationship building, that sort of thing, building trust within those contexts. If you can do that, then you'll be able to overcome the obstacles and the setbacks which inevitably come. And that's a very important thing because, as any venture capitalists know, people have great ideas, they fund it, then they got to go through the valley of death, right? To see if they can actually come out on the other side. And that's where a lot of things where if you don't have the fundamentals in place, like communication, good relationships, that's a lot of times where they fail. And that's just it's exacerbated in the public sector. One thing that is very important, I think, is, when we talk about ecosystems, we talk about, not only within countries, but between countries as well. And this is something that in the community, I'd like to explore a little bit more. When I did my master's degree, it was in comparative public policy. So the way that we studied it was that we took a look at government systems in the European Union versus the US versus South America versus, the Far East. And so we compared each one of those to see how they were different, how they were similar, what are the lessons that we can learn from each one of those. And so again, ecosystems these days are very important because the technology that we have, specifically communications technology, I know that we have a lot of people in the Middle East that are listening to us right now. I'm in Washington, you're in Silver Spring. And so I always like to say that internet killed geography. There is no more geography because we're a globally connected economy and globally connected innovation ecosystems. So again, those basic fundamental things are so important now, and that's we can always speak from the same page. And that kind of brings me to the next topic. Or before I do that, does anybody have any questions about ecosystems and innovation ecosystems within governments? Any comments? Doesn't look like it so far. Okay.
Lauren, before we move away, there's one thing I completely forgot to mention that I'm seeing in the impact innovation community is a need for patient capital is emerging for impact innovation. And that's something that I think our community is especially well suited to answer that kind of query. So we'll be talking a lot more about how to create patient capital.
That's right. And I would say that's extremely important these days because a lot of the issues that we do deal with in the public sector are, longer term type risks that you're dealing with. And, for example, infrastructure improvement or how do you, make a city more livable? These are not things that come up that you can deal with in a short term. These require years and years of investment and collaboration, relationship building again, to come to fruition. So, and that brings me to our next topic, which is public-private partnerships. There is a saying in the United States that all politics is local. Okay, so whatever you see at the national level or even the international level, a lot of times it comes down to what is happening at the county level or even at the city level, these types of things. Now, how do you deal with that in government spaces? A lot of the financing, for example, when you take a look at innovation, in rural areas, for example, when you're dealing with things like agriculture, food security, these things, a lot of it is done, at the local level and at the county level. And those public-private partnerships are absolutely key. And like you said, patient capital is going to play a big role in that. So, Adil, tell me a little bit about your experience with public-private partnerships. I mean, what are your views on that? How do you think that we can best, address that theme within our community?
At the grassroots level, of course, from the grassroots level, as you said, all politics are local, right? And
Right.
all innovations, when it's fed from the grassroots up. A simple example that whether we are at a city, state level, whatever our level is, do we have innovation management systems in place where the needs for innovation are percolated up rather than someone at the top just thinking, oh, it might be a good idea.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other one I'd say is that being a government, it's kind of easy to fall into the trap of, oh, we create this checkbox of 50 different things. You fill this up and you're innovating.
That's right. Go make it happen. Here's what
go
we
make
said.
it happen.
Take care of
Yes.
it.
Yes. Here are your 57 guardrails. Go innovate, right? So
Right.
there definitely needs to be a balance to hold ourselves back and kind of do just the minimum that is required, but to foster that innovation, right?
That's
So
right.
I'd love to, yeah. I see the attendees list is like from very many places. I'd like to love to hear where they are from at one point. But yes, private.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get to that a little bit later too. As a matter of fact, I'll make a little announcement a little bit later about, how we're going to communicate with our community. And I mentioned podcasting before. Yeah, that's one of the interesting things is that you do see, not just in government, but in any hierarchical organization. Everybody's kind of looking to see what the boss is going to say. And They say, okay, here's my idea, and everybody says, okay, great, go make it happen. But it may be a good idea, but actually making it work is going to depend again on people understanding it, on the relationships and that sort of thing. And just to, again, a little story to kind of go back to what I was talking about podcasting is that when I did create that program within a government agency, nobody knew what I was doing. They essentially said, okay, you know something about this, right? And I said, yeah, I understand. Okay, go make it happen. And so I knew that what I needed to do was going to build the relationships with the people that I was going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. They were the ones that needed to understand. And it wasn't just something that I did because it felt good to do it. There was a strategy behind it. Okay. So if you can go down and talk to the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis and get them on side, get their trust, get their confidence, they are going to convey that confidence to all of their stakeholders as well. Okay. And so pretty soon, if you do that, you've created a good base of understanding and relationships, a network that is going to be able to help you push that innovation through the long term, okay, through all the different pilot projects and the failures and all that sort of thing. If people understand what you're trying to do and they trust you that you're doing it in good faith, that's how you sustain innovation over time. And that's when you'll be able to generate results, I think, within a big organization. Um, so anyway, that's the epilogue to my story that I had before.
So,
It worked. It
You
turned out
just,
well.
as usual, you triggered something. Another story from my end that um, I collaborated on workforce development. Is a future of work is something that we are very passionate about in our venture studio. So we worked with some public school districts, and it's very important that uh, from the for public private cooperation, it's actually I think it'll serve a lot if the government and in the we set on our north stars collaboratively and make the correct the correct destinations our north star, right? Example is that in the future of work, all universities, I mentioned it in some other webinar here in Genie, is that all universities or all educational institutes, they check their graduation rate as their success metrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
doesn't count how many of them after graduation are actually getting gainfully employed or earning a living, good living, right?
Right.
So setting the ladder as a north star, right? And I think in the because the government has a lot of data like the labor market data, etc., right? So there's a lot that can happen.
Oops. Hold on one second. I think we kind of lost the deal there for a second. Just give it a moment. Technology is great, but sometimes it misbehaves. Okay, well, you just have me now, it seems. We'll wait for Adil to come back. In the meantime, I want to take a look at a couple of comments that we got in the chat feed. So Simon talks about, with ecosystems, there's an important delineation between innovation for government within ecosystems and then innovating with government as a catalyst for ecosystem innovation. So that kind of gets back to public-private partnerships, right? How do you manage that? Simon is go ahead and feel free to throw another comment in there if you want to add to anything on that. So I think that's a good separation. Okay, innovating for government within ecosystems. So you might have there's a lot of government contractors out there who they go to and they say, okay, we have a problem. provide us a solution. Okay, so those are the big government contractors, Deloitte, Ernst and Young, and others that do those sorts of things. And then innovating with government, those will be the public-private partnerships where they're actually working as partners. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to the local level. Okay. One thing that I like to do is I go to rural parts of the country, specifically Maine, and I've talked to a lot of the economic development people and a lot of the challenges that they face. And like you said before, Adil, I mean, being able to, talk to the stakeholders and have like a bottom-up approach instead of somebody coming in and saying, okay, I'm here with, your solution and here it is. It's much, much better for the long term and to build the relationships and get the patient capital. Again, like you said, when the people who are going to be affected by whatever those programs are, they have a stake in it. They have a voice. And it's not just that, they need to feel that they've been heard and been engaged in the process. Again, it all comes back to relationship building, I think.
And actually, venture studios nowadays are kind of gravitating toward the model where even they decide to make, before they decide to make a product, they actually identify the customers. They pay, usually the early adopter customers, in the ideal case, they are paying to build the product. So when that's something that I think as public service agencies, we can take a deeper look at how we can emulate that in the context of public service.
That's right. There's a comment here from Dr. Alama, and actually, with regards to the podcast, she and I had spoken the other day. I'll get to this a little bit later, but stay tuned for a podcast that's going to drop a little bit later with our conversation. That'll be great to see. And she says something in her comment here that innovation should become a catalyst for inclusion, dignity, and prosperity. And again, this is something that is unique to the public sector. They're not interested primarily in driving profits or profit sales or that sort of thing. They need to make sure that people have health care. They need to make sure that people do have opportunities to get training if they need it. If they're being displaced by macroeconomic conditions, that sort of thing, so that you do have a specific set of circumstances and drivers for government innovation. And so I'd be interested to hear for Dr. Lama, a little bit later about, how she might conceive of how that's done in a government space. And again, coming back to my original point, I think it really does come down to the local level. The city and the towns and that sort of thing, they need to look at what their specific circumstances are and what innovation means to them personally. Because it may be different or it certainly is different from, a larger city or a different country, for example.
And to build on what Dr. Alman just said about inclusion, dignity, and resilient prosperity, I think this is the difference in the traditional VC or angel, right? Because I remember me, okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I remember reading an article where this VC, by the way, I love VCs. I love angels. It's just, I'm just contrasting them. So this VC basically wrote an article saying why 10x return is not enough. He basically explained that literally for them to survive, they are always shooting for 100x return, right? And that's something where the as public services, we have the, I'd say, opportunity and also the luxury to think differently, right? And address those tremendous amount of white spots left out by traditional VCs and angels.
That's right. And that's where, to my mind, that's where the sandboxes come in, within a government agency. And when I say government agency, I mean, we can talk about any government agency. It could be a big national agency, but again, it could also be something at the city level. Okay, the process is relatively the same, the innovation management process. But then again, it needs to be tailored for, what is happening at the local level. And this is something where I think, when I just first discovered human-centered design and a design thinking methodology, it was tremendously exciting because, here's another story. I'm overseas and we're having a big meeting with industry people and they're talking about innovation this and innovation that. And we had somebody come in and say hello to them and welcome them. And then after the session was over, I had a little chat with our principal and he was like, Lauren, we hear about innovation, but what does it mean? Nobody really knows what it means. And I had to laugh because I said, you're absolutely right. Nobody really does know what it means. Everybody knows what it is, but how do you put it into practice? How do you operationalize it? And that's where you have a process like design thinking, human-centered design, which starts again with empathy, okay, relationship building. You have to understand, what your constituents are really trying to do and they're really trying to gain from the process. And if you miss that, then you end up spending a lot of time, a lot of resources on something that doesn't work. And so again, it's always where it starts in my mind is again, building those relationships with the constituents that you're serving, within a government context. And that's
There is a
difficult.
Q&A.
Let me just say one last thing. That's very difficult for a lot of government people to acknowledge because they do have specific regulations and budgets and everything that they need to follow. And to come up to them and say, well, we have an innovation process, but we don't know exactly where it's going to lead. For a lot of people, they say, well, if you don't know what the objectives are, why are we doing this? And so again, that relationship building, that trust is very important to say, okay, we're going to explore different avenues. We don't know exactly where it's going to lead, but you got to trust us, okay, because we're going to come up with something interesting on the other side.
There's a question in the Q&A. What are the key indicators or blind spots that a government organization should monitor, which signal that an innovation project has entered the valley of death?
Right. Good question. Again, I would say that, let me answer and then I'll throw it over to you, Adil. I mean, again, it depends on the context and what you're trying to accomplish. Key indicators are blind spots. I would say that within a government agency, those are some of the key questions you need to answer right up front. Okay. And you need to be able to talk to the people who are in charge, your different stakeholders, to figure out, what are those blind spots or the indicators? What does success mean to them? And then, that's going to be highly dependent on whether you're rolling out new software. In my case, whether or not you're rolling out a new media program. Okay. As a producer, that's something that I'm always concerned with. And then what are the different indicators that will say that, okay, we don't want to continue with this, or it's a little bit fuzzy, but we still see some value in it. We're going to continue, or, okay, we're going to kill the program. Okay. Or we're going to go ahead and put it into, production, that sort of thing. So Adil, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how would you go about answering that question?
And that's spot on. I mean, it's basically touches on, say, that in lean startup, they have this build, measure, learn cycle at the end of each cycle. So first you have a hypothesis, you build to test the hypothesis, you measure your result and learn from that. At the end of that, you always come to a point where you do pivot or persevere, right? That's when you engage with this. To begin with, you engage with the stakeholders, right? Figure out what success is. And then again and again, you come back and answer that. And it may evolve. Keep an open mind that it might evolve because we are always learning. So the classic answer to this question, I guess it depends. But
Right. That's probably not the answer he wanted. Oh yeah, I know exactly, what answer to give to that question. But the reality is that it's just very tough to know. And so again, I think that's where the process is so important. The empathy-driven process of human-centered design, that gives you a roadmap and a guide, to answer those questions, which are always changing, and it's very difficult to do. This is a good point to bring in how we're going to manage the community, and again, it's something we all bring our own talents, our own experiences, to these leadership roles. In my case, it's something that, communication and that relationship building is very dear to my heart. I think it all starts with that. It reminds me of a quote I saw the other day from Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates. This guy's well known for running this massive hedge fund. And he was asked a question and he said, I started this not because I wanted to make money, it's because I wanted to play the game and, develop good, meaningful relationships. That was his motivation. The money for him was almost like an aside, right? I mean, good for him. He's done quite well, obviously. But it was a good quote because, again, it's a reminder that, through all the budgets and all that stuff that we have to deal with, it really comes down to people, relationship building. So to come back to my original point, that's one of the ways that I want to manage this community is I want to give people, not just a voice. It's one thing to post texts and LinkedIn posts and that sort of thing, but it's another thing to get into conversations with people and get to know them. And so, like I said before, I recently had conversations with two people who were part of the Jenny community, and we're going to post those, probably in the next week or so, after we're done here. And that's something that I would like to continue doing. I'd love to be able to interview all the different community members so that we can tell their story. And so they can actually, communicate that to their constituents and the rest of the communities. Okay, because again, we all join Jenny to, learn skills and, maybe even help advance our projects that we're working on. But again, without the relationship building and the confidence and the trust, it doesn't matter. It just won't happen. So that's one of the things that I really want to do is make sure we have good, robust communication, throughout the communities. Now, Adil, I know that you are working on venture studios. Tell me what a venture studio is. I'm familiar with it, but I've said to you before that I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more about how you manage those things. And it's really a really good innovation context.
Absolutely. So I wish I could claim credit for the answer I'm going to give, but I got it from somewhere else. Okay.
Okay.
So it's coming back to nomenclature, right? There are so many buzzwords around. So that article basically said the difference between VC, incubator, accelerator, and venture studio, right? So VCs basically, he said, they pick, they literally get, they have a 100-10-1 rule, right? They get 100 applications, do due diligence on 10, and invest in one. Out of that, about 20% succeed, 80% fail. That's VC. Incubators and accelerators, they typically mentor, pick and mentor, right? They'll do design thinking class, lean startup class, etc. on top of
right. How to do a marketing plan, all
yeah,
those
exactly.
things.
The whole funnel thing and all that. So, and venture studios build. So pick, mentor, build. Venture studios basically usually 100% of the time, they have a thesis. I want to concentrate on supply chain, or in our case, future of work, wealth, well-being. That's like intentionally high level, high enough so that there are lots of problem areas inside that. But they start with the thesis, then actually go about through the R&D, do a problem market fit. Is this the right problem to solve? Then problem solution fit. We think we have a solution for this, right? For this niche, and then up to product market fit, right? That we have pull from the market for this product now, right? That's the happy path, of course. But venture studios basically roll up their sleeves and bring in co-founders, funds, the technical know-how. They amortize the cost of building as well. So this is reflected in the equity that they take at each level as well. VCs take the least amount of equity. Incubators, accelerators, they take anywhere between 5 to 10%, or whatever it is, right? Early stages can go up to 20%. Venture studios typically start with 20 to 30 to, I even heard about something like 70%. But right. At the same time, they are basically reducing the risk, cost, waste, drama of the 0 to 1 journey say 10x for the founder. So the founder can really dig into the problem.
Right, exactly. That's my understanding, and that's something that probably we might want to have some more discussions on within our community.
Absolutely.
Okay, how do you take a venture studio concept and apply that, within a government agency? Because I think it's a good fit.
It
Like you
is.
said.
It is absolutely what you mentioned, like a sandbox. This is your sandbox basically, and that comes with an operating model, kind of that. And there are, I'd share some public studies in the channel. There's some fantastic studies made that on Venture Studio specifically, why it's a good fit for 0 to 1.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and then we'll have to talk a little bit more about how a venture studio is organized. I think the key difference,
Absolutely.
like you said,
Yes.
is that, venture capitalists, they look for a company that's already has a business plan, it's already been established, it's got founders, perhaps it has revenue, and they take a look at it and they say, okay, we're going to give you money to scale this up. Okay, or to continue on this journey. Incubators and accelerators, they provide the know-how, okay, in exchange for equity. But a venture studio is different because you do have the founders, and they take a look at a much broader subject area. Let's say agriculture, for example, and they say, okay, what are the different innovative prospects? And those could be, a wide range of things. What are the things that we want to cultivate? It's almost like a garden, I would say. You have a garden and you want to see what's, as the gardener, you're the venture studio leader. You want
Oops. Did I lose it?
a lot more options. That's true.
Sorry, I'm cutting off a little bit. I'm turning my video off. Can you
Okay.
guys hear me?
Yeah, it may be on my side too.
Okay. And so I think the biggest challenge in the venture studio operation that I found is to the co-founder or problem co-founder fit, right? You might be passionate about a problem, right? But unless the co-founder thinks that, like the same, so it's very hard to match. But when you can match it, it's a beautiful thing, because to see someone else like taking ownership of something that you are also passionate about, and really making progress, that's fantastic. So yeah, I would love to get into the weeds eventually. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think within the context of our community, let's call this an example of patient capital. Okay, patient human capital in this case, because it's
Yes,
a good.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, without that, no amount of money will move the needle.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So that's one thing that from with your expertise, I think a lot of people will benefit from that. From my space, again, my focus is going to be mostly on communication. How do you build relationships? How do you build reputation? Okay. These are very important things as well in the innovation space, but specifically within government context. And I will be reaching out to other leaders of the different communities again for these conversations, podcasts. Stay on the lookout for that. If you have any questions on that, feel free to give me a call or connect with me on LinkedIn. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and drop my website into the chat. And everybody, you can take a look at my background here, connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can have a discussion about what that might look like in the near future. And so at this point, I'd like to open it up for general questions. Okay, we do have a question from an anonymous attendee. They didn't want to give us their name, but that's okay. We'll have a conversation later, maybe. What are the differences between innovation process and R&D process? And where do they intersect, if they do? So to my mind, R&D is more about the technical side of things, and this is what, when a lot of people hear innovation, they get an image of, people in lab coats, looking into microscopes and that sort of thing. So research and development, a lot of times that is, science-based, for example, or particularly when you're talking about technology. But an innovation process, again, specifically within the government sector, because you're not necessarily dealing only with technology. You're dealing with how do people go about their daily lives? How are they paying their electricity bills, that sort of thing. So I think the process itself is, again, with human design, human-centered design, that does give you a process through which you can go through with just about any type of innovation process, whether it's a government service or a tech or a product or whatever it is. How do they intersect? Do you have any thoughts on that, Adil?
Yeah, so actually they intersect in our venture studio, right?
There you go.
because 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 the R&D is a very much part and parcel of a venture studio, where we are doing the problem market fit. Is this even the right problem to solve?
Right.
Finding the market segment that for which it is a hair on fire problem. We have all heard about painkiller versus vitamin, right? You want to identify early on the segment that is really feeling the pain that you're trying to solve. So that's all. Uh, that's where it's already intersecting with the innovation process, right? And once you have identified a problem, real problem to solve, that's when your full-fledged innovation process kicks in. You have to uh, feed it with the co-founder, the team, the money, etc., 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 and then they can go about their merry way.
Yeah, that's important too. I think it's important to really make that distinction, between an innovation process and research and development.
Right.
A lot of people in technology, and I'm going to throw out a little quote. This is from Warren Buffett, right? He says, "You never ask a barber if you need a haircut." Okay, so the obvious answer is, if I'm a barber and a deal comes to me and says, "Hey, should I get a haircut?" I'm gonna say, "Well, yeah, you should get it at my place," right? So the way that you kind of extrapolate that maybe to a government service, if you're a consultant or something like that, and a government agency comes to you and says, "Do I need do I need this technology to improve services?" Well, yeah, you should definitely have that and a lot more too, right? So when let's just take, if you're a local government agency, it's important to understand, like you said, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because a lot of times maybe it's not technologically based. Maybe it is about, simple communications infrastructure, that sort of thing, with when you can use your existing tools to accomplish that goal. So I think that's probably the biggest differentiator right there between the value of R&D versus an innovation process. The innovation process gets into much more basic things about relationship building and identifying the problems that you want to solve. And then the R&D is where the tools are. Those are the technological tools that you would want to implement in those contexts.
Right. And one thing, actually, I'm kind of building on what Dr. Alnama said, that we are also innovating in R&D. We need it. So it's actually, instead of, it's like a, what is it called? Assembly line thing, that R&D followed by innovation process is actually a circular thing, right? As you do you go through your innovation process, you'll definitely encounter things that will feed your R&D process that you have never even thought about before, right? So in many agencies, I've seen that it's when there is a danger when you consider it as a linear process rather than a circular one, where if you ship something out there and we are not learning from what we are seeing, then there's a broken link there.
Yeah, absolutely. That feedback loop is absolutely crucial. Yeah. And this needs to be designed on purpose. Okay, that's part of the innovation process. If you don't end up at a place at the end of the innovation process that is feeding back into, the very beginning of the process, then something's wrong. Okay, it needs to be that circular dynamic, like you said. Another question here from Leah, which is interesting, is about rural populations. Okay, and this is something that governments, I think, across the world are dealing with. Is that, and this touches on workforce issues and that sort of thing, which is a deal. This is something that you've talked about and we've talked about, which is very important. Is that, how are people in rural areas, getting the government services that they need? How are they being empowered, through technology, for example, internet connections, if you're in the city, you can almost, say, well, I'm going to have an internet connection. It's a given. But if you're out in a rural area, you may not have, good internet connections. How do you run a business? How do you get education, that sort of thing in those type of contexts? So I think that is right there a huge area for innovation processes, is that how you connecting the rural areas, which by the way are where all the food is being produced, agriculture, that sort of thing. How do you get them connected into these spaces? And that's something that, again, for me is near and dear to my heart because I spend a lot of time in rural areas. I love to go fly fishing and that sort of thing. And I have a real appreciation for it. It's where I grew up in California. It's a very agricultural part of the country. So Leah, thanks for that question. I mean, that's something that I think we'll probably want to address more later on as we go along, because I think it's a very important thing to deal with. And Adil, from a workforce point of view, I mean, have you thought about rural areas and how do you integrate those into innovation processes? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So that's actually not even a billion-dollar question, probably a trillion-dollar question, because workforce disruption that is happening. If you see all the expert opinions that how disruptive is all this happening, is it going to be, right? I have heard percentages from anywhere between 10% unemployment to 90% unemployment. That's unheard of. I mean, you cannot fathom that, right?
Right.
And of course, rural areas will be probably the majority of that is affected first or whatever, right? So this actually highlights our first, going back full circle, we have 5 minutes, to how important it is now to rethink our role with patient capital, with our glasses on, to identify which areas need help, right? And really think through what are the new generation of workforce, what is the new career landscape look like, right?
That's right.
And the traditional VCs and angels are not geared for that. This would be falling down to government agencies to figure out what to do with the 10% to 90% workforce, God forbid, of course.
Right. Right. And in some areas, I mean, this is a really serious problem. People, I mean, a lot of people in the rural areas, they're losing a lot of their population because there's no jobs. The people that grow up there, they take off and they go to the cities. And so, yeah, this is something that is definitely something maybe we should focus on as we go forward. So, but first things first, I'm going to produce the first two podcasts that I mentioned earlier. So you'll see those very shortly. And there is, oh yes, Dr. Alama says we should include innovation courses in school and universities. What is the meaning of innovation? Yeah, and that should start very, very early too, because these are things that are tremendously important. And so we'll talk more about that too. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop there. Adil, any final comments, thoughts?
Well, disruption cuts both ways. So it's our job to make disruption effect in the right way possible, right? So
that's right. We'll try to make sense of all that within the government innovation community. So It's interesting for somebody like myself. I'm really glad to be here with Adil because you've got the venture studio and the venture capital knowledge and all that stuff. You kind of bring that to the table. I think I have a diverse background where I've worked with a government agency and done innovation within them, and also worked with incubators and accelerators, on a lot of different topics. So hopefully, throughout the course of our, doing the podcast and, doing the different, community events that will come here shortly, we'll be able to help people make sense of that. And, at any time for anybody in the community and other communities, if you have questions for us, you have our LinkedIn, you can post it in the community on the Jenny website. Don't be shy. Let us know what's on your mind and we'll get back to you.
That's the sign-off message, right? I mean, this is a conversation. This is not Lauren and Adil talking. It's it has to be a conversation.
That's right. And just for the record, we did not do a PowerPoint presentation today. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I personally don't like them within a context like this because it draws away from, getting to know the people and developing those relationships. So, if you want to send a PowerPoint, go ahead and send it as an attachment. I'll happily read it. But we love to have conversations in these things. So let's continue that. And yes, you are welcome. Looking forward to meet all of you one-to-one. And I'll be reaching out to the other community leaders. Some of you I've already done so, but we'll reach out to the rest of everybody. So we're going to stop there. Everybody have a great day.
All right.
And Adil, enjoy the gray, rainy weather in Eastern US today.
Yes. All right, guys.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.